Tiens, moi, j'ai pas le droit de leur donner le. Good morning to all, good afternoon to all of you, and we are very happy to welcome you to this new One Planet Summit initiative. I'm Olivia Grégoire, French Ministry of State for a Social and Responsible Economy. Good morning to all. Near Bruno Le Maire, here in Bercy, in Paris. The meeting is about to begin. We're very proud, very glad to share this moment with you. And we're going to start with an introduction from the President of the French Republic, of course, Emmanuel Macron.
Monsieur le ministre de l'Économie, des Finances et de la Relance, Monsieur l'envoyé spécial des Nations Unies pour le climat, cher Michael Bloomberg, Monsieur l'envoyé spécial des Nations Unies pour l'action climatique et la finance, cher Marc Carnet, Monsieur le gouverneur de la Banque de France, Mesdames et Messieurs les présidents, représentants d'institutions publiques ou de coalitions d'acteurs privés, chers amis. Depuis plusieurs années, nous avons tous pris beaucoup d'engagements en faveur du climat. Les États se sont engagés et ils doivent aujourd'hui agir de manière concrète. C'est la raison pour laquelle j'ai souhaité la mise en œuvre du Programme international d'action pour le climat à l'OCDE qui rassemblera des moyens de suivi et d'évaluation robustes pour mesurer de manière homogène, avec une méthodologie établie et vérifier que les mesures prises par chaque État permettent réellement de tenir les engagements contractés. La finance privée aussi s'engage. Ces dernières années ont vu de nombreuses coalitions d'action émerger, notamment sous l'égide du One Planet Summit que nous avons ensemble lancé le 12 décembre 2017 pour décarboner nos économies. Derrière chacune de ces coalitions, ce sont des centaines, maintenant des milliers d'entreprises qui s'engagent avec désormais la neutralité carbone pour 2050 en ligne de mire. Je ne crois pas que l'on puisse douter de la sincérité des intentions de chacun. Nous devons d'ailleurs rappeler que pour avoir une neutralité carbone 2050 dans nos pays, il faudra que certains secteurs aillent beaucoup plus vite et accepter de différencier les efforts. La multiplication de ces coalitions est le signe que la prise de conscience est là. La lutte contre le changement climatique est une course contre la montre et nous devons pour cela coopérer parce que sinon il n'y aura que des perdants. Mais ce foisonnement pose un risque de fragmentation de l'action, d'hétérogénéité des engagements, de mal-mesure en quelque sorte de nos efforts réciproques et in fine une question de transparence des résultats et donc de confiance pour nos compatriotes. Nous devons donc faire en sorte que les coalitions que nous avons mises sur pied gagnent en lisibilité, en effectivité, en homogénéité, en permettant à leurs résultats de s'agréger. C'est pourquoi, en amont de la COP26, j'ai proposé aux principaux leaders du secteur privé, engagés pour le climat, de mettre en place dans le cadre de cette coalition un mécanisme de suivi des engagements des entreprises et des investisseurs. Grâce au soutien de Michael Bloomberg et de Mark Carney, que je remercie une fois encore, parce qu'ils n'ont jamais été en marge de ce combat, bien au contraire, ils l'ont mené, porté à nos côtés, ils ont été plus qu'engagés. Et avec les différentes coalitions du One Planet Summit, nous avons la chance de pouvoir annoncer aujourd'hui la création du One Planet Data Hub, une plateforme pour laquelle les engagements et leur exécution seront recensés et accessibles à tous. La diffusion de ces informations répond à une double exigence. D'abord, de rendre compte à nos concitoyens des actions que nous prenons pour sauvegarder notre planète. Nous représentons ici le pouvoir politique et économique et nous leur sommes en cela redevables. Ensuite, de donner une visibilité d'ensemble sur l'action du secteur privé. La neutralité carbone d'acteurs pris individuellement ne suffit pas. Nous devons avoir le moyen d'agréger les efforts, de nous assurer aussi que nous sommes collectivement sur la bonne voie pour atteindre les objectifs de l'accord de Paris. Nous devons aujourd'hui répondre à une urgence climatique, mais également une urgence économique et politique. C'est pourquoi je suis très heureux que le One Planet Summit accueille cette nouvelle initiative de transparence et de responsabilité. Rendre des comptes de manière transparente et concrète sont les conditions de notre crédibilité et de notre succès collectif. La tâche qui est devant nous est immense, car derrière, il nous faudra décliner aussi des méthodologies et une standardisation pour les investisseurs et pour les entreprises, comme nous l'avons fait avec les normes comptables. Il nous faut bâtir des normes qui seront des normes, si je puis dire, climatico-politico-socialo-comptables. C'est beaucoup plus difficile. Et il faut en la matière que ce travail soit mené avec engagement, transparence et esprit de responsabilité. C'est ça ce que nous allons faire, grâce à ce hub et cette méthodologie commune. Je compte beaucoup sur l'engagement de chacun. Je veux aussi remercier Christine Lagarde, qui, dans ses compétences actuelles et, je dirais, intuitu personnel, n'a jamais cessé son engagement à notre côté et elle jouera, compte tenu de ce que je viens de dire, un rôle important dans ce travail de standardisation. Bon courage à toutes et tous et je vous remercie.
Thank you, Mr. President Macron, for this speech, which stresses, as you've heard, on the importance of this issue for our common future. I will now give the floor to Mr. Mark Carney, UK Prime Minister's Finance Advisor for COP26, and also UN Special Envoy for Climate Finance, Action and Finance. I do not have the duty to present you, Mr. Mark Carney, because everybody knows you. The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame, vous êtes trop gentille. Et je voudrais commencer par saluer le leadership de Monsieur le Président et le leadership de mon ami Bruno Le Maire. Vous avez innové et tracé la voie permettant une finance pratique et durable. And I just want to spend a few minutes saying how we are building on these successes that France has led, the successes of One Planet, and how today's initiative of the One Planet Data Hub fits in to the system. And let me underscore at the start that it's absolutely essential. What we are collectively trying to do is to ensure that private finance is available to fund the trillions of euros of investment that are needed every year in order to build a sustainable economy. And the good news is that in no small part due to the efforts of the One Planet initiatives and France in general, the money for ambitious climate action is coming into place, as we just heard from the President. And the private financial sector is being transformed. The concepts of Paris alignment and 1.5 degrees have moved from the periphery to the mainstream in recent years. Net zero commitments of countries have risen from about 1/5 of global emissions 2 years ago when Italy and the UK assumed the COP presidency to over 4/5 when we meet today. And net zero is now an organizing principle that's cascading down from the global level to companies. Thousands of the world's largest companies and businesses and financial institutions are setting net zero objectives and are developing their decarbonization plans. Again, a motivation for the One Planet Data Hub. Within a few years, such commitments will be the norm. Now, to finance these plans, we need to change the plumbing of the financial system, and we need to build the commitments of the financial sector. And I'll say a few words on both, starting with the plumbing. For private finance, our objective for COP26 has been to create a system so that every financial decision takes climate change into account. There are 24 major deliverables for Glasgow that help transform the information, the tools, and the markets at heart of finance, and we're on track to achieve them all. Don't worry, I won't go through them all. I just want to highlight a few of the most fundamental. It starts with climate reporting. 6 years ago in Paris, the TCFD was a concept. 3 years ago in Hamburg, the final recommendations were delivered to G20 leaders. And now, with experimentation and application, the private sector has taken this disclosure about as far as it can on its own, and it's time to finish the job by making TCFD disclosure mandatory. This is coming through European leadership, through the leadership of the One Planet and the declaration a few months ago, and also through global support for the IFRS Foundation's proposed International Sustainability Standards Board. The ISSB will produce a climate disclosure standard based on the TCFD and drawing on other frameworks by the middle of next year. And this will ensure that stakeholders in over 130 countries will have access to the reliable, comparable, and consistent climate disclosure they need. Now, to be clear, this disclosure works alongside taxonomies, and it serves as a building block for more ambitious normative approaches. Better disclosure and a heightened sense of urgency are leading to a transformation of climate risk management. A few years ago, at the inaugural One Planet Summit, the Banque de France founded the NGFS. And that coalition of central banks and supervisors has grown in just a few years to over 90 authorities in countries responsible for more than 80% of the world's emissions and all of the world's globally systemic financial institutions. These supervisors are now bringing climate risk management into the core of finance, and central banks in countries with more than 2/3 of global emissions are pursuing climate stress tests. The third point on the plumbing of the system, and the one most relevant for today's discussion, is the new financial system will help financial institutions identify and seize the opportunities in the transition to net zero. Because given that climate change is an existential risk, it follows that those companies that are part of the solution will create enormous value. Leaders in the financial sector recognize the opportunity in the transition and the need for credible and robust plans. There are now over 400 major financial institutions from across 40 countries that control assets of over $100 trillion that have joined the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, or GFANZ. French firms led the way, co-founding GFANZ in the spring, and they represent over 12% of its total assets. This is the gold standard for climate commitments. It ensures that pledges are in line with the science on climate change and are anchored in the UN's Race to Zero. Members of GFANZ set targets to achieve net zero financed emissions by the latest in 2050, but they also crucially set interim targets for 2030, reflecting a fair share of the 50% emissions reductions required by the IPCC. In addition, they must set out 5-year decarbonization plans and report annually. We've deepened and broadened this membership in the run-up to COP. A few weeks ago, led by AXA, major insurers and reinsurers joined GFANZ, pledging to align their insurance underwriting with net zero. We've also formed an alliance of market infrastructure providers. These are the index providers, the credit rating agencies, the stock exchanges, and the major audit firms who will align their products with net zero. So it's working to develop the best practice standards for company transition plans so finance can do what it does best, which is to allocate capital to distinguish the leaders from the laggards in the real economy. That approach will leverage existing guidance. It will also develop portfolio alignment metrics so that we can see how the aggregate of a financial institution's balance sheet is aligned with net zero. We recognize in this that regulators and central banks will play an important role in incorporating these best practices into their supervisory expectations. And to that end, GFANZ is engaging directly with public bodies, including the Financial Stability Board. But the fundamental point, and the point the President stressed, is that all stakeholders, including very much the general public, will want to hold financial institutions to account to see whether they are living up to their commitments. There is a clear public good in gathering all of these commitments from various alliances and assessing their impacts in one universally accessible format. And the One Planet Data Hub will fill this need. It's a one-stop shop for the public to assess the commitments and actions of financial institutions. I very much welcome the launch of this tool that will bring legibility and accountability to the hundreds and thousands of net zero and environmental announcements. And I strongly encourage all financial institutions to follow the lead of those in the Paris Financial Center to reporting transparently their ambitions, their actions, and their impacts to the new One Planet Data Hub. As part of its accountability framework, GFANZ will work very closely with it. After all, our planet's climate doesn't respond to nice words or clever commitments, only the brutal physics of greenhouse gas emissions in our atmosphere. We need a rigorous approach to measuring the impact of the financial sector, something the Data Hub will deliver. And as a final point, as France and the President have stressed, in order to stabilize our climate, it's critical to connect the supply of capital in advanced economies with the demand for it in emerging and developing world. We need to turn billions of public capital into trillions of private capital. Let's admit it, we're currently far off the mark. Actual investments, of course, will depend on specific projects and the overall investment environment within recipient countries, including the credibility of their climate plans. But those conditions are much more likely to develop if the sufficient capacity is in place. And that's why we need new country platforms to deliver the over 1 trillion euros of new annual private capital flows needed in the emerging and developing world by the middle of this decade. These platforms can combine ambitious country climate plans, or NDCs, and the projects that will help achieve them with the expertise of multilateral development banks and the GFAN's commitments for net zero aligned investments. With $100 trillion of private balance sheets targeting net zero investments, we need a radical new approach to get that money where it will have the biggest impact. So, in sum, we have the net zero commitments we need, we have the development of transition plans, but we also need the mechanisms to hold financial institutions accountable to the public. And the One Planet Data Hub will help fill this need. It will, in fact, fill this need. Going forward, all financial institutions should be judged not by what they say, but by their hard numbers, their total euros of transition financing, the amount of polluting stranded assets that they help retire, the emissions they help eliminate, and their timelines to get to net zero. The One Planet Data Hub will track such impacts, helping to drive the race to the top. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark. We are very lucky, and we know this, to have you with us today, because I feel like it's the busiest moments of the year. So thank you for your time and your words. So now allow me to give the floor to my boss, the minister with whom I have the honor of working on sustainable finance issues for years. Minister, dear Bruno Le Maire, the floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Ministre, chère Olivia Grégoire, Mr. Secretary General of the OECD, dear Matthias Cormann, dear Commissioner Mairead McGuinness, Special Envoys of the United Nations for the Climate, dear Mike Bloomberg, and dear Mark Carney, ladies and gentlemen, representatives of international coalitions, dear friends, I am delighted to have you here all together a few days before this key moment of COP26. Bringing together public, economic and financial actors is of the utmost importance to me, because it is only with full cooperation, transparency and solidarity between all of us that we will win in the 21st century's crucial struggle, the fight against climate change. This is why the One Planet Summits were a necessity, and this is why they are a success. And thank you all for being here. As the President of the Republic just said, many commitments have already been made to fight climate change. We constantly look at all the efforts that still need to be made, and we are right to do so. But we should also stand back for a second and look at all the progress that has been already made over the past 5 or 10 years. Since the One Planet Summits were launched under President Macron's initiative in 2017, coalitions of thousands of private and public actors are born and are growing. I would like really to thank my two friends, Mike Bloomberg and Mark Carney, for their long and constant commitment that will also be decisive for next week's COP26. Your Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero brings together the core of the financial system to accelerate the net zero transition with clear commitments and clear actions. You are behind two of the major initiatives in the One Planet Data Hub presented today. Commitments have been made, but the COVID crisis is clearly a wake-up call. We have to do better, and we must work harder to win the climate. President Macron just said it, the COVID crisis is a wake-up call for all of us. We need to do more. The big question behind our efforts to fight climate change, let's be clear, it's money. Let's not be afraid to say it. The green transition is costly, very costly, extremely costly. We need money. and we need a lot of money. Just for France and just for our energy sector, necessary investments will cost up to 1,000 billion euros by 2060, which means that we should not divide the financial issue and the climate issue. We have to put together those two key issues, funding and climate, finance and climate. Finance must be a green finance so that we can win the battle against the climate change. However, the gaps are widening between states in the fight against climate change, and it is clearly a matter of concern, and it should be a matter of concern for all of us. France had taken leading action to fund the green transition. Just want to recall what we have decided to fund the green transition, 30 billion euros. I would like to recall that we have stopped funding coal mining projects abroad, that we have aimed at stopping to fund oil and gas production projects abroad, respectively by 2025 and by 2035. The French banking establishment, La Place de Paris, has also stopped funding coal mining projects abroad, and it has announced that it will stop funding shale oil, shale gas, and tar sand production projects by 2022. But let's be very clear, and I have been very frank to the French banking establishment yesterday. The French banking establishment must do more. It must act better, it must act quicker. Many developing countries have joined the effort, but let's be clear, they must be helped to finance the green transition. And some states have not done enough, and they must rapidly take stronger action to join the collective effort. In several countries, we are all aware of that. Coal is back, and that's bad news for all of us. The deal is quite simple. Together we win, divided we lose. If we want to win the climate battle, those gaps between the nations, between developed and developing countries, must shrink, and we have to work more closely together. This is why the Open Planet Data Hub is clearly, to me, a key feature to help us win together the climate battle. The necessary changes are so big that no government can have the will or the power to unilaterally force its economy onto a carbon-neutral path. And states cannot act alone. All private and financial actors must join the struggle. I will not pay alone the bill of 1,000 billion euros for the French nation. And the French state does not have the possibility to fund these 1,000 billion euros alone. We need the support of the private finance. This is why the One Planet Summit's principles, soft law, cooperation, collective intelligence, are the ones to follow in order to face those great challenges. Cooperation between the public and private sectors is the reason why my friend Matthias Cormann is here today, and thank you, Matthias, for being here. Thank you for supporting all our efforts. This is also why we wanted a One Planet Data Hub to monitor the implementation of the Paris Agreement by the private sector. And this is why am I so delighted that it is launched today. I think that this is clearly a good path in the good direction. Because the key issue is transparency. Everyone, citizens, companies, states, must be able to find out at all times who is doing what to fight climate change. Information must circulate and be accessible freely. To guarantee transparency on such a scale, you have a unique and powerful tool, data. France had launched a national observatory to monitor commitments and to establish common methodologies. But in our globalized world, such data must be managed on an international scale in order for it to be truly relevant on the long term. This is why we fought so hard to build a One Planet Data Hub. It will be a fantastic tool for the green transition. It will work as a public database on an open platform. It will bring together data from all voluntary collective initiatives, including One Planet coalitions. It will concern both commitments related to the fight against climate change and those in favor of the preservation of biodiversity. The One Planet Data Hub will essentially help to ensure that private actors contribute effectively to the transition and that efforts are shared and coordinated. A very final word on the fact that the climate battle is a standards battle. ESG international standards must and will be issued. Let me stress once again the importance of having ESG international standards. France and Europe have taken a clear lead on ESG issues. We are launching our taxonomy system of sustainable activities. We will soon have the most demanding extra financial standards in the world. However, we surely have a lot to learn from the rest of the world on the matter of the ESG standards. This is why the launch of the One Planet Data Hub is good news. Full clarity and full transparency are needed. This is why I am delighted that the OECD is also a leading party on the matter of ESG standards. And this is why we count on all of you to help us improve on our own standards and their compatibility with the rest of the world. Thank you for being here, and thank you for supporting those key efforts.
Thank you, Bruno Le Maire. We should not divide financial and climate issues. It's a good beginning for us today for this set of the One Planet. We're gonna follow with Mrs. Mary Helka Pangestu. I now hand over to you, World Bank Managing Director of Development Policy and Partnerships. The World Bank has been one of the historical partners of the One Planet Summit, and I thank you. And it's a real pleasure to have you today and to have you always by our sides to benefit from the World Bank's historical talent on those issues. Mary, if you hear me, the floor is yours, and thank you to be here.
Thank you, Olivia, and good luck with the delivery of your child. Your Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor to address you today at this important discussion. Mobilizing ambitious commitments from a broad range of actors has been a real achievement of the One Planet process. And the World Bank is very pleased to work in partnership with France and the UN on this effort. I would like to commend France's leadership, not only in bringing business and finance players into the tent, but also for providing a forum for tracking progress on those commitments to achieve a low-carbon sustainable economy. Just like finance and climate cannot be separated, we also want to stress that development and climate should also not be separated. As we ask developing countries to adopt zero carbon commitments, there is really a need for them to shift urgently and at scale, but they need to do it on a long-term low-carbon development path that will not just bring the climate goals, but also deliver on a green, resilient, and inclusive development. That is why the World Bank Group has set a much more ambitious target of 35% of all our lending to go towards climate finance in the next 5 years. Most importantly, we will be working to support countries to integrate climate and development objectives, including through our country climate and development reports, which will become a core diagnostic for the World Bank Group and inform engagement with clients, as well as inform the private sector on the country's plans. This is the kind of paradigm shift embodied in our climate change action plan for the next 5 years, moving from investing in green projects to greening entire economies and from inputs to measuring impact. Delivering on climate and development and the required sector transitions, including coal exit, as has been mentioned, will require technological breakthroughs and funding at scale. And this can not only come from public sources, domestic and international, but in fact, most of it will need contribution from the private sector. And therefore, there is a need to create a robust pipelines of high-impact climate projects that can meaningfully reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So this speaks to the country platforms that Mark Carney was talking about. But we need to get the right policies in place as a first critical step, from climate proofing a financial system to regulating vehicles or setting energy efficiency guidelines to national climate plans, whether NDCs or long-term strategies. So setting a low carbon direction of travel is important, obviously, for countries, but most importantly, if we want the funding to be in place to respond at scale and urgently, it sends a signal to the private sector. Our private sector arm, IFC, is deploying innovative platforms, creating and strengthening local capital markets, and greening domestic financial sectors. This will help generate opportunities for transformative projects and private capital from all sources to flow at scale for both mitigation and adaptation activities. The One Planet Data Hub will really be helpful in all these efforts. It will provide a one-stop database that will help monitor private sector commitments, provide transparency and accountability, and measure efforts of the private sector in the green transition. We also recognize that establishing global sustainability and climate-focused taxonomies, disclosure frameworks, and reporting standards will be critical to ensuring that private sector and green finance commitments will actually be met, especially with respect to investments in developing countries. In this context, we are pleased to see the progress made on what Mark Carney is calling the plumbing of the system. Let me mention the International Corporate Sustainability Reporting Standards by the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, which built on the framework put forward by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And I just wanted to stress that with COP26 starting in Glasgow in just a few days, and as countries seek sustainable pathways out of the disruption caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, it will be important to ensure that these transparency and monitoring tools do not present unintended constraints on emerging market capital flows. Developing countries' needs should be taken into consideration in designing these standards, and we are committed to capacity building, support, and analytics and diagnostics to help them implement the standards once they are finalized. Let me end with a reminder that people must be at the center of climate action. We cannot separate climate also from the people that are affected and can benefit from addressing climate change. But we have to recognize that global inequality is growing. The share of global wealth in low-income countries is below 1%, despite being home to about 8% of the world's population. More than a third of low-income countries have experienced declining wealth since 1995, and climate change threatens to exacerbate these trends. So this is, we need to do more, we need to do better, we need to tackle climate change and development together, solidarity and togetherness to address inequality wherever we see it. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie-Helge Pangestu. And it reminds me the talk we had in Paris a few weeks before. And I think it's very precious to have a great coherence in your expression and your thought about developing countries above all. So thank you for this point. We're now, as you know, heading the core session of this meeting with a very interesting panel with a high level guest who agreed, and I thank you, to support the launch of the One Planet Data Hub. Ladies and gentlemen, you also agreed to express your views on the challenges of having another view of the private sector's achievement, as well as the challenges and difficulties of standardizing methods and both indicators. So, to begin, Mr. Larry Fink could not attend, but we are very fortunate to have Mr. Philip Hildebrand, Vice Chairman of BlackRock, with us. I will begin, Mr. Hildebrand, by asking you one first question. for a company like BlackRock with thousands of companies in its portfolio, how do you make sure that climate strategies are implemented by the companies you invest in?
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Ministre, Olivia. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I want to also salute the President and France for the persistent and ongoing commitment to tackling climate change. He was very, very early. I remember being in Paris for that opening dinner and meeting, and he has never wavered. So thank you, Bruno, Olivia, and to the President in particular. It's an honor to be part of this session. And Larry Fink sends his best on his way to Glasgow. We're running out of time, as the President has said. The good news is awareness has changed, I think, significantly in the last couple of weeks that we need to act desperately and urgently. There is no question that one of the critical impediments at the moment is the lack of data to meaningfully analyze and track progress across all sectors, and anyone whether it's Eve or others in the private sector, I think can attest to this as being one of the critical challenges. So, this initiative comes very timely to launch this One Planet Data Hub. And I think the involvement of the OECD is also a critical piece of it. At BlackRock, our fiduciary approach, Olivia, is central to our role as an asset manager. We're focused, and we have to be focused, on what is in the long-term economic and financial interest of our clients. Because climate change and climate risk is undeniably, undisputably investment risk, that means our fiduciary duty compels us to include climate considerations and climate risk into our investment process. I firmly believe that we are at the beginning of a tectonic shift of capital and change in asset valuation as investors consider the implications of climate-related physical and transition risk to their portfolios. Increasingly, we're also witnessing, as we speak, that capital markets are changing the cost of capital for corporations. And this, of course, is an indicator of how the market assesses a particular company's sustainability strategy. As a result, last year, we therefore evolved our expectations of companies on climate and how our investment stewardship team engages with companies. We asked the carbon-intensive companies have a business plan that aligns with global net zero by 2050, with short-term, medium, and long-term targets for greenhouse gas emission reductions. The right plan, of course, is very company-specific and not for us or any asset manager to determine. It varies by industry sector, by geography, and by the size of the company. We're also interested in seeing the companies are carefully managing their impact on people, whether it's their employees, their customers, the people in their communities where they operate, and the people in their supply chains, and that they are mindful of their impact on natural capital beyond climate, such as forests, biodiversity, water, and other scarce resources their businesses depend on. We are a supportive long-term shareholder. 70% of our assets that we manage on behalf of our clients are pension assets or pension-related assets. So by definition, we are a supportive long-term shareholder focused on what is in the economic interest of our clients. We and other investors cannot control what companies do. We rely on boards and management of companies to own their strategies and take the important and critical decisions. However, as a long-term investor, our engagements in voting on companies year after year can help encourage them to better look after their climate and other sustainability-related risks. We are starting to see companies around the world improve their sustainability disclosures and take substantive action to adapt their business models to mitigate climate risk and capitalize on new climate-related opportunities. But they are grappling with some very challenging questions. Do they need to adapt on the margin or transform their business models entirely? How can they grow as a business while simultaneously abating emissions? To enable the rapid change required that the President laid out at the beginning, investment managers can now play a critical role, what I would consider a catalyst for positive change role, by working with industry to align on agreed net zero pathways. If we have agreed on what the road to net zero should look like, nuanced by either sector or even region, companies will be able to transform faster, as they will have a clear blueprint to follow. Working groups such as GVANs that help establish net zero pathways for a particular industry will do more to accelerate progress than any investment steward engaging with a specific company alone, even if it's a very large one like BlackRock. So I think these are some of the measures that we want to engage the companies on and with to ensure that we can pursue this pathway and get to net zero in an appropriate time frame.
Thank you very much for the quick and deep answer. I get a second question to you, Mr. Hildebrand. How do you compare today different corporates' data or strategy? How do you drive comparability?
It's a very good question. And you know, companies have always known this, and they certainly know it today. They need to anticipate. This is what a good company does. You need to anticipate how the world changes ahead of you. Whether it's increasing shareholder scrutiny of the transition plans, their greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets, and their efforts to innovate and adapt to be viable in a decarbonizing economy. From a stewardship perspective, and on behalf of our clients, we want to see that a company corporate strategy is coherent with the sustainability strategy, integrated into the overall business strategy, and not tacked on as an afterthought. I think this is very important. I look forward to the day when we don't need to add the word sustainability to a strategy, a corporate strategy, or an investment strategy, when it becomes understood that this is a critical piece in the way you elaborate your strategy. So I think this integration of sustainability and climate risk into the corporate strategy is key, is critical. We also want to see that capital expenditure plans are aligned with the sustainability strategy. This is where we can play a role in our stewardship focus, including the use of internal carbon taxes for any new carbon-intensive projects and significant investments in process efficiencies. For some industries, this may include capturing exciting new opportunities, such as cutting-edge technologies like hydrogen, carbon capture, and storage, or indeed renewable energy. Equally, we are thoughtful about companies offloading carbon-intensive businesses into the hands of less sustainability-focused players in obscure private markets. I think this is a very important point. We need to be careful that we don't push bad behavior from public companies, public markets, where you have a lot of scrutiny from investors, from governments, into private market pools, and that we create an umbrella of transparency, data requirements, and reporting requirements that covers all of the capital markets and not just the public markets. Responsible and accountable wind down of such assets may be a much better alternative than simply having them disappear into private market pools that are then difficult to track, which is one of the reasons that we are not in favor of an outright and an aggressive divesting strategy, because after all, it all depends where such an asset then ends up. From an investment perspective, despite tremendous progress in the past few years, the access of investors to corporate climate data is still in its infancy. Bringing it up to widely accepted standards is a prerequisite of comparability. And I'm really confident and very pleased that the One Planet Data Hub and the involvement of the OECD here will help develop precisely such industry standards, which are going to be key. Data remains the key challenge. I think we have to be clear on this. This is why this initiative is so important. Through our stewardship engagements from the very beginning, working with Mark Carney, we asked the companies align their sustainability reporting to the TCFD. TCFD has successfully emerged as a globally accepted disclosure framework today with over 1,700 supporters, including 60%, Olivia, of the world's 100 largest public companies and 42% of those with a market cap of $10 billion or higher. The biggest challenge for us as investors is that because disclosure is voluntary, Many companies' TCFD disclosures are still incomplete. This is a point, of course, that Mark Harney relentlessly argues on and tries to change. And we want to, again, be a catalyst for positive change as investors, as the world's largest investor in the same direction. The most carbon-intensive industries, energy industries, materials, and utilities, are actually the furthest advanced. In contrast, healthcare, financials, and IT are lagging. European companies, and this is good news from a French perspective, are in the lead, likely given the European Commission's integration of TCFD into its guidelines on reporting climate-related information. European companies have the highest percent of TCFD-aligned disclosures for 10 of the 11 recommended disclosures. However, we note that from the latest TCFD progress report that there are hardly any companies reporting against all 11, so clearly there is still some way to go. Most companies still only communicate on their direct emissions and are not yet disclosing the emissions of their supply chain and products. But no investor can afford to ignore climate issues and wait for the data to improve. So on top of corporate disclosure, applying industry models help us reach good estimates of where companies stand today. This is what we do. Our partnership, for instance, with Rhodium, a data company, is also helping us understand the exposure to physical climate risk, on which corporate disclosure is even less advanced at the moment. The most challenging question today is how to evaluate forward-looking risks and strategies on the basis of data. The science-based target and the transition pathway initiatives are both very valuable tools for investors to ensure the strategies and quantified targets set by companies on their pathways to net zero are validated and linked to real-world outcomes. So as I've tried to highlight here, and we hear this frequently from our clients around the world and from our investors, we urgently need quality data to inform decision-making if we want to avoid a disorderly transition to a net zero world. And let me be clear, a disorderly transition is going to be very costly. We believe, we've done extensive estimates on this and analysis, if we allow climate change to proceed and do not tackle and address it in the absence of action, we're going to lose something like 25% of global GDP over the next couple of decades. This will come at tremendous cost, not only in human terms, in social terms, environmental terms, but also, I guarantee you, in terms of companies' profitability, cash flow, valuations. So it really is there is no alternative to taking action, and the data piece is at the very core of this strategy.
Thank you very much, Philip Hildebrand, for BlackRock. I follow the panel. We get the luck, to get Yves Perrier, president of Amundi, here with us. As you know, Amundi is the first French and European asset manager. So it's a pleasure to have you, Yves Perrier. We will start with the same question as for BlackRock. How do you ensure that climate strategies are concretely implemented by companies?
Merci, Madame la Ministre, chère Olivia. As you know, for us, Amundi, this question of to be a responsible investor is not a recent question. When we created the company in 2010, it was one of the 4 pillars of the DNA of the company at a time where this question was not really on the table. And in 2018, we have launched a plan along 2 main axes. One axe is relating to our investment process. And in this plan, we have decided that 100% of our funds managed actively were to integrate an ESG process in addition of the traditional financial analysis. And that's the first way of the kind of action we could have, is to give a clear signal to the companies that they have to take into account this question of energy transition, social cohesion. And with our own ratings, we can exclude in some limited cases companies, but then we overweight or underweight the companies in our portfolio through this approach. And it's really a powerful incentive for the companies. And this year, we are, for all our funds, we integrate a specific energy transition performance objective. And as of today, we manage close to 800 billion euros integrated this ESG screening that represent roughly 40% of the total AUM. And in Europe, we are clearly the leader in this area. That means that for us, ESG, or to integrate the necessity of the energy transition with the social dimension, which is key, is not something which is in addition of the traditional way of thinking. It's something which is in the real heart of our investment process. And I think that this is a fundamental approach, because what we call an energy transition is in fact an industrial revolution, a global industrial revolution, which concerns the energy supply, which concerns the products and the way the products are manufactured and the chain of values. And the specificity of this industrial revolution compared to the others is that it's a necessity to do it, but it won't create new value for consumers or citizens. And its cost is huge. And today there are two elephants in the room. The first, the cost. And for the Eurozone, it's the assessment is more than 10 trillion euros until 2030 in the world. Of course, it's more. And the second point is who will pay the cost between the citizens, the taxpayers, and also the shareholders. Because the idea that we can continue to have the same standards of return on equity while integrating the necessity of this investment transformation to manage this energy transition in a way which is socially acceptable is something which is not realistic. And we have to think about this, because this question is not so often on the table. The second way is our engagement. And our commitment is very clear. We have our policy is transparent, and we rely on a stewardship policy, including our voting policy, which is an integral part of our ESG policy and commitment towards responsible investing. And each year we increase the number of companies which are covered, and we are not shy to vote against management when we consider that the strategy of this management doesn't integrate enough or sincerely enough the necessity of the transformation and that explains that we rank among the top performing asset managers in terms of voting on climate changes, climate-related lobbying and social issues.
Thank you very much, Yves. Yves Perrier, sorry. Very interesting to hear you. If you allow me, I think we get a third elephant in the room, in my room, and this elephant is time. We get little time with very high-level people talking, so I will go and give the floor to our fair Mairead McGuinness, European Commissioner for Financial Services, Financial Stability and Capital Market Unions. And I will directly go to one main question so that everyone can take the floor and say all you get to say. Thank you very much, Yves Perrier, for the time and for your involvement on those issues. We follow with dear Mairead McGuinness. I will go straightly to the point. How can we make, according to you, Mairead McGuinness, stakeholders understand that those regulations are not just reporting and compliance, but how we could make understand them that it should really help them to build their sustainable strategy? It's a real question. We hear you and we listen to you, Mairead McGuinness. We are lucky to see you, but unlucky because we don't hear you, dear Mairead. Would you mind to check your mic, please? The micro seems to be mute. Would you mind to put the micro on so that we can hear you? Well, je continue. Mais je continue. Alors vas-y vite, c'est pas hier minute. Expecting for dear Mairead McGuinness to hear you. Well, I suggest that we keep you, Mairead. I see you, and I can stand to hear you. I think it's just technical problem, so that we don't lose time and I don't make you losing your time above all. Perhaps we can follow and go on with Mrs. Palt from L'Oréal. If you hear me, thank you to be here. Thank you to be involved in
this. Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Issues. Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
Yeah, perhaps I will just put the question on. What's the interest for such a group as L'Oréal to take part, to be part of such an international coalition, and how do you compare today your climate and biodiversity strategies to others? Please, Mrs. Palt, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madame la Ministre. I'll be very honored to listen to Madame McGuinness afterwards because she has always a very, very straightforward, important contribution to these issues. So I will make it short because I'm sure we will have the pleasure to hear her. What is important, I think, is, we are very much aware of time. As you said, Olivia, we are running out of time. And what we do, and as well what countries, companies, as societies do, is not enough to what the world needs from us. And so we have to accelerate. We have to accelerate. And in order to accelerate, we need, as everybody said, data and comparable data. So from a perspective of a private company such as L'Oréal, is We have for a long time, and I think this is really a risk where we all have to be aware when we say the cost. Well, the cost of inaction to society and the world will be uncomparable higher to any cost that it will take us to make this happen. And we should not forget that at any moment of our action. So at L'Oréal, we have come from a place where we had financial and extra financial performance to a place where we think performance in terms of everything together. So any performance that wouldn't be sustainable or responsible is counter-performance. We cannot differentiate anymore between the two of them. And I think this is really important. In order to do so, we have, of course, to measure. And to measure means that, first of all, companies have to define themselves targets in every domain that are related to science-based targets. It's not anymore sufficient to say, well, even climate targets are not anymore just sufficient. We have also to have biodiversity targets. We have to manage water scarcity. And every time what we have to do has to be aligned with science. And it has to be aligned with science for countries as it has been in the Paris Agreement, and it has to be aligned with science for companies as is science-based targets. But this has to become much more common and include other issues. So in all these, of course, science-based targets for companies after Paris Agreement have helped to define common targets. We still have to be aware that there are issues around communication, there are the issues around how we can make Scope 3 happen. You know, for us, sometimes 80% of the carbon footprint of a shampoo or a shower gel is on the consumer side. So you imagine what difficulty it is for us to reduce these emissions by 50% in 2030, because that means you have to take showers that are colder, less long, and so on. So there is also the citizen and the consumer of coming in. But what we need is clear that the system has to change faster. The investor community has to change faster also, because yes, we are challenged, but companies have to be challenged more. It has to be considered as one only performance. And this performance has to be sustainable and responsible. And I think there is another point. It is great to have, and we are fully support the initiative of the One Planet data, but it is also important that in the P&L of companies, we integrate more and more what we cost society. Because what we do now is we calculate financial performance, but we do not calculate what you take away of future generations or even of our generation. And so it is very clear that we need for that also one common framework. So the more we go to common frameworks that allow companies to align, to be comparable, to also and to live up to what the world needs from us. That means science-based targets and science-based achievements. The more it is promising that we will go through the necessary transition. So sometimes there is industry initiatives necessary. What we have done for consumer communication, we have just created a pre-consortium with 5 of our competitors and entered the step of a consortium in order to align on environmental and social information, product information for consumers. So this can be complementary and should be. But what is really, really important is that everybody speeds up. And I'm not completely sure that the awareness is here that, yes, it will need sacrifices, but they are much less important than the sacrifices of inaction. So we have always to make that a point and bring it back. So we hope at L'Oréal, what we have proved the last years, we have proof points. We have reduced our carbon emissions by 80% in our industrial activity in 2020, since 2005, while having a double-digit growth also in that period. So we think that we can decouple growth and the efforts and our impact on the environment. But definitely a common framework is going to help everybody, and that's the reason why we support the initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your answer, which was very interesting, and also the time you gave us. I get 2 very good news. The first one is that, as you mentioned, Mrs. Palt, We're going to take a cold shower, but it's very good for the skin. So it's very good news for everybody else. And the second main good news is that we finally get the chance to hear Mairead McGuinness, who managed to be part of the meeting. Dear Mairead, do you hear us?
I hear and see you loud and clear. Please tell me the same. Look, Madame la Ministre, my dear friend Olivia, can I just jump into the question you asked me? Because I can support all of the comments that have been made here. We are running out of time. We know that today there is a mismatch of standards and there's a lack of coherence about what companies need to report. They want certainty. Let me say from a European point of view, we're giving corporates certainty now because we have a corporate sustainability reporting directive on the table. It will be mandatory to report these things. Our financial sector will have to report how they're investing in line with our taxonomy. We have a toolkit now that is really ready to come together and will deliver the quality information that investors need to move capital and money towards sustainability, because knowledge is power, but data is powerful. And as I listen to the investor community, the political community, we're all working in this direction to bring clarity. Our EU taxonomy, which is still a work in progress, covers over 80% of our emissions. So it covers an enormous range of economic activities. And Europe is leading in this area. We're very proud of leadership. It's really important to us, but it's not enough because Europe alone will not tackle climate change. So we are working globally. And this is a really important point for me, because if we do this on our own, we will look good, but nothing will change. If we bring the rest of the world with us on this journey towards standards that are at least common ground. I don't expect everyone to have the same standard, but I expect global standards, and Europe is working on those. And then jurisdictions can move in a different direction and can move faster. But let's talk about the common ground taxonomy and what it will deliver. One other point that's crucial from a European perspective, it was mentioned earlier, we're not just asking companies to report on the impact to their business of climate issues. We want them to report on their impact on climate and biodiversity. And really, we're looking at a holistic approach, which we haven't had in the past. We've had a very unbalanced look about return on investment, the cold figures. That now has to be linked with sustainability data so that companies will be viewed not in the short term, but will they survive for the future? And this is a really key issue. This is a key moment for the world. Next week, we will have all sorts of pledges and commitments, but it's the companies that will make the difference, the financial companies and the corporates. But equally, the big companies have a duty of care to the smaller SMEs in their supply chains to help them make the journey towards sustainability. I know this is an issue that you and I have discussed, Olivia. So there are a huge amount of positives today, but we're not there yet. We have to really work harder and faster in Europe and globally to make the significant changes. But think of the prize when we get there, because as was mentioned by the earlier contributions, you can put a high cost on what we've got to do, but the value we will get is enormous. And we don't have a choice, frankly. We don't have a choice. So all of my work around financial stability, for me, it is that if I don't make companies or show them how to report, if we don't allow money to flow towards sustainability, we will have financial instability. Let me compliment you. May I also say to President Macron and to Minister Bruno Le Maire, congratulations for this leadership. We look forward to your presidency at EU level. But I think having this global hub where we will have transparency, accountability, where people can trust what they're seeing, and we can all then compare our work, this to me is absolutely vital. So thank you for allowing me to be part of it, and thank you for making the microphone work. That was a big help.
You're warmly welcome. Thank you. I quote the "we don't have the choice," and it's a fantastic transition with our other panelists, our following panelists, because we feel like we don't have the choice also on issues dealing with biodiversity. Bruno Le Maire told about this. Marconi also. And we're going to turn the floor over a newcomer. And it's a warm welcome to you, to the galaxy of international coalitions that you are making dynamic. So thank you, a newcomer who is sorely needed as the extinction of biodiversity becomes a growing concern. It also carries financial risk, as you all mentioned, that we are not well understood yet. Dear David Craig, you are the chairman of the new task force for nature-related disclosures. Here is my question. First of all, warmly welcome in the coalition. Dear David Craig, biodiversity has become vital, I would say, more than a major concern for the financial sectors in recent months. Can you share with us the main standardization objectives of your task force, the TNFD? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Madame Gregoire. Firstly, can you hear me? That's fantastic. And thank you for the support and leadership that you and the French government are giving to this critical issue of sustainability, including, as you say, nature and biodiversity and the goals of the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. And you are very right, Olivia, and actually hearing many of the speakers before me point this out, there's a growing awareness across the financial and corporate communities alongside the impact of climate to the material size and extent that nature and biodiversity risks presents to our world and also our financial ecosystem that depends on it. And whether this risk is from use of fertilizers, land degradation, pollination, destruction of forests, land use, availability of clean water, all of the things that we can talk about, just a few examples, I think it's really important to understand these impacts are across all industries and well beyond agriculture, where the issues are sometimes confined as being most relevant. And I think we're also realizing that climate and nature-related risks are really two sides of the same coin. Climate change and the weather system patterns right now is impacting natural resources and food supplies, and realizing that these play a key role in also addressing climate change. So in short, I don't think we should be trying to achieve net zero and get to a 1.5 target without considering how nature can play a really key role in both achieving this goal and also how nature will be impacted more if we miss or the mitigation strategies that companies are following are not aligned to nature-positive activities. So the nature and climate risks and the mitigation actions are really tightly coupled, yet as we make real progress on standardizing how climate risks should be assessed, managing and reporting, we're only really just starting to create a common approach to nature, and this is our goal of the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. What will we do? We will build on the success of the TCFD. We're reusing many of the approaches and frameworks that they have pioneered over the last 6 years. And our goal is to develop a common and standard risk framework for identifying, assessing, managing, and disclosing on nature and biodiversity risk. And frankly, a lot of work has already been done at the level of standards and metrics. And so what we're really looking to do is pull all of that research and guidance into that uniform framework. Something that is market-driven, that is accessible, that is practical for companies, investors to use and make decisions on. We have to separate what the input data is from the output data, and we have to put simplicity on something that is actually very complex, nature and biodiversity. But ultimately, we want to help investors and the corporates understand both those direct risks from nature and also the direct impact on nature and biodiversity to exactly what your last speaker said. And this will not only ensure that we help manage those risks and those externalities, but also ultimately redirect capital to those nature-positive outcomes that support the ecosystems that our businesses rely upon, and also create more investment opportunities and jobs, as we've seen in climate, in new nature-positive methods and technologies. So in short, a standard approach, building on TCFD, recognizing the differences between nature and climate are distinct, but also these are two sides of the same coin, and we really have to align these measures together if we're going to be successful in our 1.5 degree goals.
Thank you very much, David. It's very important for us, and I allow to say this about all the members of the One Planet Data Hub, to have you part of the lab and of the team, I would say, because we work like a team. And TNFD is warmly welcome. all we can share from TCFD, as you mentioned, experience, I guess I promise that we will. And I just want to mention that it's a very recent initiative. So TNFD is the little sister of TCFD, and be sure that France, but I guess all the members that were listening today, will be near you in the coming months and years to help you and to strengthen the fantastic coalition that you're driving, and very important coalition also. Thank you to be here, and we will go and follow the fantastic panel we share. After you, our fellow newcomer, please, we're now giving the floor to an almost historic coalition whose productions, whose works have become for years decisive in the consideration of climate risks and now biodiversity risks by the financial sector. The famous Network for Greening the Financial System is also an historic partner of the One Planet Summit, and you regularly prove that you can bring together many, many institutions and be a tremendous machine. Let me introduce Sabine Moderer, member of the board of the Bundesbank and member of the NGFS Steering Committee. Very happy to have you with us, Mrs. Moderer. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Although we are running out of time, please let me emphasize that I really would like to take the opportunity to thank President Macron and the French government, but especially also my dear colleagues from the Banque de France for constantly putting climate change and biodiversity on the top of the agenda, not only in Europe, but globally. And such special leadership is crucial for our success. And as a German citizen, may I also emphasize that I think the French-German alliance is crucial also to push this sustainability agenda in Europe further. Okay. I warmly welcome the launch of the One Planet Data Hub. It is really an important step on our path to net zero. And this initiative will help us to increase transparency and to hold financial institutions accountable. The public acknowledges voluntary climate commitments, but they also call for actions and accountability. A transparent monitoring how financial institutions have implemented their commitments is therefore essential. Credibility is at stake. Financial institutions can, or they also must deliver. Well, transparency is key to protect financial system against climate-related risk. That's where central banks come in, and also to scale up sustainable finance. From the very beginning, and you have mentioned that, at our Network for Greening the Financial System, where we are now 95 central banks and banking supervisors fighting together climate change. For us, transparency was from the very beginning very high on the agenda. And already at our first report, I remember in 2019, also in Paris, we emphasizes the need for internationally consistent climate disclosure and the development of a taxonomy of economic activities. Transparency is a precondition to a successful transition to net zero. And maybe just one remark on what the NGFS is also doing. Just now in September in Paris, we started a new project on a data universe for sustainable finance, because also we in the central bank world notice for us it is crucial, and for the whole public sector, to have decent and enough data. Getting back to transparency, transparency can be achieved for a consistent and robust disclosure-based and a common understanding of sustainable activities. Therefore, the One Planet Data Hub initiative supports our efforts at the NGFS to boost this transparency and to push a more sustainable future. Collecting financial institutions' climate commitments and making them accessible to the public will enhance market transparency, but at the same time also credibility. It is essential that the commitments clearly state short-term targets and also interim steps that can be assessed and monitored. Market transparency ensures that all stakeholders are on a credible path to net zeros, be it public sector, companies, financial institutions, or the civil society. All of our roles are different, but we do have one thing in common: the need for data and transparency. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moderer, in the name both of Bundesbank but also the NGFS Steering Committee. We are also lucky to have with us dear Matthias Kormann, who is giving me who is giving us the pleasure of his presence. Mr. Secretary General, you're here because of the OECD is very, very, very active on those issues: ESG, investing, green finance, responsible business conduct, and assessing the alignment of finance flows with the low carbon transition and also the SDGs. You play a key role in developing indicators, monitoring trends, developing standards. We wanted to share with you the opinion, the vision you get about your role in ensuring the coherence of private actors, climate and sustainability strategies with the ambitious international goals. Thank you, Mr. Kormann, for the OECD. The floor is yours.
Merci, Madame la Ministre, chère Olivia. Climate finance continues to grow globally, but as has been discussed, we still face a massive funding gap, particularly when it comes to developing and emerging economies. And one of the jobs the OECD has had since 2015 has been to assess progress towards the $100 billion US dollars target of climate finance provided and mobilized by developed countries for developing countries. And last month, we released the latest available verified data, which showed that in 2019, developing countries received about $80 billion US, which was up just 2% from the previous year and about $20 billion US short of the 2020 target. I'm pleased to report, though, that based on further commitments received from donor countries over the past few months and revised projections of a future climate finance provided by the multilateral development banks, we believe it is now likely that we will achieve and probably exceed the $100 billion US target in 2023, with further increases in 24 and 25. Also, relatively hot off the press, just yesterday, we were able to announce that the OECD Development Assistance Committee will fully align official development assistance, and that was $161 billion US in 2020 with the climate objectives of the Paris Agreement on climate change. So that is an important development as we approach COP26. As we fast approach COP26, the level of increased ambition to respond more effectively to climate change, is very encouraging. But as we commit ourselves to successfully transition to global net zero emissions by 2050, what will matter ultimately is to translate increased ambition into real action and real measurable outcomes. And financial markets clearly must be part of the solution. There needs to be a thorough transformation of the financial system, as has been said, to better incorporate long-term climate risks and opportunities. And right now, over 40 trillion US dollars in assets are currently managed subject to some form of environmental, social, and governance assessment. Issuers and investors are doing more to assess climate risks and opportunities and to publish transition plans to achieve net zero. In turn, financial markets are beginning to integrate climate transition risks and opportunities into investment decision-making. However, progress, we believe, remains insufficient. The policy community must collectively take action to strengthen market practices, integrity, and trust. And one of the key challenges we must address together is the highly diverse range of approaches, ratings, methodologies, definitions, metrics, and information when it comes to the transition plans for climate finance. This span of disparate views hinders the effective pricing of capital, and it also slows the necessary alignment of markets to net zero pathways. Our work at the OECD has found that scores across major ESG ratings providers lacked consistency, and that in fact, too often, environmental scores were not even consistent with lower carbon emissions or emissions intensity. As a consequence, some high environmental score ESG portfolios actually have a higher carbon footprint than the existing market benchmarks. And just by way of example, the Standard & Poor's ESG index has an average of 9.5 tons of CO2 emissions per company for the energy sector, compared to an average of 7.8 tons of CO2 emissions in the traditional index. So while ESG scores can incorporate ambitious forward-looking climate transition plans, the mechanisms to monitor and engage with corporate boards to ensure they deliver on credible promises remains underdeveloped. So OECD work on ESG investing, including for the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, is providing some clear recommendations to address these challenges. So let me just highlight a few. First, we must strengthen the interoperability and the comparability of ESG rating and investing approaches and scores to provide a strong and more objective basis from which to inform investment decisions. This is really the key for the E in ESG and the climate in particular, while the S and the G are subject to more subjective interpretations regarding best practices. Secondly, we must improve the alignment of the ESG environmental pillar ratings with low carbon transitions so that investors can be confident that ESG scores provide reliable insights with respect to net zero pathways. Third, we must ensure that climate transition plans have decision-relevant information on transition risks and opportunities, including science-based targets and interim reporting. Such progress is vital to help institutional investors hold companies to account for their timely implementation of transition plans and to provide feedback to boards and management about the financial and reputational consequences of inadequate performance. In addition, public sector efforts to monitor private sector commitments will be needed at the national and international levels to better track progress and to ensure, indeed, that we remain on track. To move this important work forward, the OECD will advance a policy framework to integrate environmental governance and social factors that support the net zero transition. That will include analysis to identify market impediments and provide policy recommendations to address them, including on moving beyond ESG to broader sustainability issues and the Sustainable Development Goals, in line with the work which was initiated during the French presidency of the G7 and the joint OECD-UNDP framework for SDG-aligned finance. We plan to develop definitions, principles, and due diligence guidance for climate transition finance by 2022. Updates to existing legal instruments are planned to our responsible business conduct, corporate governance, and financial regulations. And let me just say that in closing, high-quality, internationally comparable data, in tracking effort and impact, ensuring accountability and driving improved performance is critically important. And the One Planet Data Hub is a much-needed initiative in this context, and the OECD stands ready to contribute to our collective efforts in this space. We all must continue to work together, public and private sectors, and all of the relevant key stakeholders, to turn ambitious political commitments into real, measurable outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Coleman. It was very accurate, and thank you to make, in a few minutes, the brief wrap-up of all the work OECD is doing on all those issues. I will follow. We share a high-level meeting. I just want, before the conclusion, to say you a sincere thank you for the name of the President Macron, but also Bruno Le Maire, to be here until the end of the meeting, which is sometimes rare. So I really want to thank you to be here. We will now hear and listen as a conclusion. Someone I think I don't get to present. I mean, Michael Bloomberg. Just want to say that the commitment of Michael Bloomberg to this issue has never wavered for years, never. Furthermore, it's impossible to deny, as said Bruno Le Maire and also the President, the crucial role of the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, our dear TCFD. Again, thank you, Michael Bloomberg, for being with us for the launch of the One Planet Data Hub. You were in Paris a few weeks before, and you were present to say how you believe in the One Planet Data Hub. We're going to listen to you now before my brief conclusion. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for your continued partnership. When world leaders convene in Glasgow next week, they'll do so at a critical moment in the fight against climate change. And we all know the fight is too important for governments to do it alone. The private sector continues to play a key role in directing capital to clean energy and accelerating the race to net zero emissions. One way we can mobilize the power of that market is with greater transparency. I chair the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and it's encouraging to see the global support for it continue to grow. The more that investors can see data on the climate risks and opportunities that companies face, the sooner they can shift to sustainable investments and put capitalism to work for climate action. I want to thank President Macron and the French government for their leadership in increasing transparency and accountability in our climate work together. And with France assuming the EU presidency soon, I'm excited to see you continue to accelerate our progress around the world.
Thank you, Michael Bloomberg. I really want to thank you all and each of you for participating in this panel and also supporting the One Planet Data Hub. I know how each of you has got wonderful agendas, so I really want to thank you for the time you took to share this moment, this hour and a half together, talking about, of course, our planet, our future, but above all, about the data, which appears at the conclusion like our new frontier. Each of you underlined how important it's to walk the talk and to come from coalition to harmonized data from all around the world. Michael Bloomberg has just said, and I quote him, that the fight is too important to be driven alone. Each of you has also underlined how important it is that we share these common goals to open data together from all our countries. We all agree on the need for this Data Hub initiative, but also on the need to work together on the methodologies, on the standards regarding data. I just want to add, to be brief, that it was a sincere honor for me to moderate this panel with such high level and so involved people, so important people. You are in the struggle we are making together for the planet, for biodiversity, and to get more and more financial actors involved in this common and global struggle. I look forward to meeting you again in the coming months. Be sure I'll be there. And to develop this hub together, France is there. Every country, every coalition you embody are so important on this initiative. Let's make it together. Let's make the data talk, and let's walk the talk together. Thank you very much, and have a very good afternoon or morning, depending on your countries. See you soon, and thank you for your time.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup,
Merci.
Olivia.
Bravo.